Hello, welcome to International Women's Day. We are so glad that you're here. What an incredible day. We are watching you pour into the room. There is so much energy. The chat is going crazy, and all for good reason. We have over 1,000 people that are going to be joining us throughout our presentation today. Some are in conference rooms, streaming together with their organizations. We have 35 businesses that have partnered with us for this to be their main event, and over 75 organizations represented. We are even going across 10 countries. We have people who are waking up tomorrow waiting for the streaming service so that they can broadcast this afterwards and be able to participate. So this is a moment that really is going to move the needle, and we are so excited about it. So thank you for being here. Thank you for making space. It is hard to do so, but we do it for things that matter, and gender equity matters. If you have any questions along the way, please be sure to put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring them and giving them to the panelists. If we can at the end, we'll get to a few last ones if we've missed anything, and then we'll follow up with you if we didn't get to your question. So with that, please let me introduce the CEO and founder of Women on Their Way and the McGuckin Group, Audrey McGuckin.
Let's dive in. This idea of gender equity and inclusion, certainly top of mind for many organizations, and yet the progress has been excruciatingly slow. And why is that? We think that there are four reasons. One is this lack of opportunity. Often women don't get access to some of the critical roles in organizations, often the profit and loss roles or the revenue roles. The second idea is there's a lack of confidence. I'm sure all of you have heard the phrase imposter syndrome, and I can tell you that that's not exclusive to level in an organization. We have many CEO women leaders who are part of our community and our insiders, and they talk about confidence as well. And so whether you're at the beginning of your career or you have decades of experience, we see it across the board. The other piece is really around lack of vision. Korn Ferry did a great study where they interviewed CEOs, women of every type of organization. And what they learned was that only 12% of those women knew they wanted to be a CEO before somebody told them it was possible. I always tell the story about, when I would work with a CFO of a very large company, and he was doing a development meeting with one of his tax managers, and he said to her, what's your big dream, Stephanie? And she said, if only I could be a director of tax. I'm a manager right now, but only if I could only be a director. And Forbes said, actually, I think you have the potential to be the CFO of this $30 billion company in the next 5 to 8 years. And that was life-changing for Stephanie. And so that's this idea of creating moments of inspiration and opening the aperture of what's possible for women leaders. And then the fourth one is one of my favorite ones. It's this idea of lack of truth. What do I mean by that? And why do I say that? It's a flawed sense of reality. If you ask CEOs, tell me about your numbers as it relates to women leaders. Typically, an answer that we'll hear back is, oh, Audrey, we've got almost 40% of our workforce is women leaders. Okay, and how about at the one level below CEO? Well, we've actually only got 1 or 2 women leaders there. And so it's this flawed sense of reality. So when you hear some of those things, you certainly know that there's something else behind that. And so those are some of the reasons that it's deeply rooted and that we can't get to addressing it. And the numbers tell us a story. This one's staggering. Despite there being 50% women in the population, there's only 7% of women are CEOs at Fortune 500 companies. That in and of itself is staggering. But actually even more staggering is that the World Economic Forum is saying that it's going to take 132 years to close the gap. That is generational. That's my daughters. That's your sons. That's your nieces and nephews. It's generations to come. And so our perspective at Women on Their Way is that we need to think about this differently, and we need a new way, or we get the same old results. You know, we had an International Women's Day event earlier this morning, and so many of the women leaders that were exiting the workforce said, "I can't believe we're still here. You know, I fought for this and we did so much work, and I can't believe we're 132 years out." So it's not a pretty picture. And I told you we were going to celebrate, but I also told you we were going to ground ourselves in the cold hard facts. And our mission at Women on Their Way is to close the gender gap. And you know, that's great to have a purpose, and it's great to be mission oriented. But how are we going to do that? So, you know, having researched this for 3 decades and had millions of pieces of paper and lots of notebooks, we've codified it into 4 areas. So we think about it from the perspective of 1, women leaders' mindsets. That's a key lever. The second is organizational culture. The third is the leadership in organizations. And then the last one is the talent systems. And we're going to unpack a lot of those with you today. And we're going to give you some practical takeaways as well as inspirational takeaways. But before we do that, I want to hop into this idea of mindsets. One of the mindsets is that we struggle to be confident and bold at the same time. And how do you do that at the intersection of humility? We're going to share with you some thoughts that we've got on that. Overvaluing hard work. This again is one of my favorites, because I was certainly somebody that was guilty of this, which is, if I just work hard enough, surely I'll get noticed. If I just work hard enough, surely I'll get the next promotion. And that's not actually true. You have to be very strategic about your career, and strategic means intentional, and strategic means thoughtful. And strategic means not raising your hand to take the notes in a meeting. It means not sitting at the back of a room when you enter the room. It means, if you're going to go to a presentation, thinking about your questions in advance and how can you be first to raise your hand and ask a question. And it means taking back your agency and taking back the power of you. So that's one of my favorite ones. This other one I love as well, right? And I can see some of you smiling on the tiles. And it's this idea of, I really need to build my network. I have to start building my network. Yes, you do. Also, you will go further if you leverage your network. And there's a subtle difference. And we want you to think about that. And women tend to feel uncomfortable leveraging their networks because they have a mindset of not asking for what they need. And so the invitation is, ask for what you need. The answer's unlikely to be no. And then this one here really is the last one I want to illuminate in the mindset space, which is, we hear a lot of women leaders saying, if I could just have a mentor. I think that would really help me if I could just have a mentor. And what we like to do at Women on Their Way is we like to leapfrog decades of myth and decades of legend that can hold us back. Mentors are great, sponsors are better. And the difference is that the mentors are there to coach you and guide you. And sometimes they can be outside of your organization, but a sponsor is always inside the organization. They're always somebody that has a seat at the table, and there's somebody that knows what your strengths are, because they have to advocate for you. They have to advocate for you when you're not in the room. So those are some inspirational thoughts as we think about this idea of the mindsets of women leaders. You can learn much more about that. Follow us, get on our LinkedIn page, and we share tons of material. So you'll learn more about that there. But what I do want to spend time with you on is, how do we now strategically navigate some of the systems and the conditions that are stacked against us. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how do you actually do that? A lot of people think that it starts with the tool. If you could just give me the tool, then I know that I can be really successful. If you will just give me the process of how to do it, then I know I can find my way there. And what I would say to you is yes, and this work is deeply personal, and it depends on where you are in your journey. And what we've found to be the biggest lever is when you start with why. It's when you start with your purpose. Why do you do what you do? And you know, why do you do the, you know, we talk to a lot of finance people. They don't do finance work just because they like numbers. You know, one of our incredible women leaders from Puerto Rico said, the reason I work in finance is because, you know, I have a lot of family members who are in deep poverty, and I want to be able to teach them what it's like to care and know and how to manage this. And so that's what we mean. And I'm going to start to bring our panel into the conversation because I want to shine a light on them. And Sangeetha, I'm going to have you go first. And this idea of sharing your personal story on why do you do what you do, Sangeetha?
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Erica. And hi, everyone. I'm loving the engagement on chat, so keep that going. My perception of a woman's place in the workplace was shaped by my mom's stories, which she shared with me over countless meals at our kitchen table. So she grew up in a small town in India and later in the United Arab Emirates, and she worked her way up from being a cashier to becoming the first woman to lead a branch for her global money exchange company. And despite her remarkable achievements and consistently delivering exceptional results, my mother was never truly promoted. Meanwhile, she saw all the male colleagues around her that they were advancing within the company while her career stagnated. So every time I take time to reflect on my mother's professional experience, my resolve to change the world of work grows. I am convinced, actually, that my mom would have been in the C-suite if her growth was not limited by the societal norms for women at that time. So I'm sure that many of you can relate to my mom's story. So her story, my story, and countless others like it are the reasons I'm so eager to foster conversations about what we can do to remove the limitations that hold women and people of color back. So look, I can't help my mom advance in her career. None of us can. She's retired. She's very happily retired. But my 18-year-old daughter is joining the world of work soon. And we want work to be easier for those that come after us. So as a leader, I do so by fostering the right conversations, by encouraging women not only to operate from a scarcity mindset, but an abundance mindset. So, you know, I always say this, if there aren't enough seats at the table, the right thing to do is to get more chairs and build a bigger one. And the lastly, I would say is that being my authentic self, even when it's scary. So, you know, I dress how I want to dress, I lead how I want to lead, and I say what I need to say because I do this because when I was growing up in my career, I didn't see women take those risks and do that. And, you know, they always say you can't be what you don't see. And I had to really change that axiom in the head and say, I want to be the leader that I wish to see for myself and for others. And so this will help us pave the way for those that follow.
Sangeetha, thank you. And, you know, one of the reasons I specifically wanted you to join us, I'd heard your story before, but not only had I heard your story, I actually saw your actions, the trade-offs that you make with your family and with work to help other women leaders do not go unnoticed. And, you know, one of the things we do at Women on Their Way is we'll help you link and label things. And I want to give you language, and I want to give you strong language. And one of the things Sangeetha said is my resolve. That's powerful. When you can say things like my resolve. The other thing is abundancy. I heard you talk about. And this metaphor have a picture in your head of more chairs and slay those axioms and mindsets. So thank you, Sangeetha. Danielle, let's have you hop in and join us.
Thank you, Audrey. Hi, everybody. It's very exciting to be here. And yeah, what a great crowd. This is awesome. So I've spent my whole career in talent and obviously very passionate in this space. And I realized like so much of what makes me want to do the work I do is that just my curiosity about people, but also I think I realized pretty early on that I was able to help people unlock their potential and fulfill their potential. And whether that was early days in agency recruitment, helping kind of place people and figure out what they needed to do or what they wanted to do, through consulting, and then into in-house talent roles where I've had increasing amounts of responsibility as well. So really kind of trying to understand what's going to work for that individual and help them get there. And I've definitely been a beneficiary of a lot of the things Sangeetha and Audrey spoke about. Strong female role model in my mum, sponsors when I was working at Adobe, who absolutely accelerated my career. And I'm so grateful for that, and also want to pass that and pay that forward. So I take my responsibility very seriously. I also realize, and we'll talk a little bit more about the talent systems later today, but in the role I have, the responsibility I hold to help advanced, other women, underrepresented groups, make sure that we have an increasingly equitable playing field. And I take that responsibility heavily and seriously. So yeah, there's some of the reasons I do what I do.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. And this idea of responsibility and duty, right? That's what I heard. That you feel that responsibility because you've been a beneficiary. And so, yeah, thanks for sharing. Katie, can we have you go next?
Absolutely. Guys, I am so excited to be here. And I just saw the numbers tick up on the participants, people who really wanted to be part of this today. And I got more and more excited just to engage with such an incredible group of people, many of whom I've had the chance to meet. So many I haven't yet, and I am over the moon to do so someday. I'll share a little bit about early life for me, because it is the genesis of where what I do comes from. I consider myself as a little 5-year-old girl, a student of the imposter syndrome. And I happen to be a little girl with very, very significant confidence. I didn't have a governor. I just wanted to do anything that I wanted to do. But I looked around me, and I often found that my girlfriends would question. They'd ask, oh, well, can I do that? And I never felt that way. I never asked myself, can I do that? I always assumed that I could. I always did. And I found that many of the male friends that I had made, they didn't ask those same questions. And that same theme has continued and continued throughout life. And one of the reasons I feel so strongly about the work that we're doing here today, the discussion that we're having right now, is it's not even just about gender. It's removing that lack of confidence and saying, I can. Assume that you can. Start there. And I want to be a leader who steps in and helps people realize that. We'll talk in a little bit about some of the things that we're known for, but that's one of the areas where I think it's so important as women leaders, as leaders, to release that, well, can I? Of course you can. You can. That perspective, that shift is amazing and powerful. You can. And I want to make sure that everybody on this call knows it. Every person that I work with knows that. Thanks, Audrey.
That sounds very mission oriented, Katie. And we've done a lot of work with you and your team at Johnson & Johnson. And we know that your team feels that from you, right? And words matter and actions matter. And following through with those actions. This idea of confidence is huge. And I think it can be underestimated. And I also think that there's a spotlight on it. We just got through COVID. We're dealing with a war in the Ukraine. There are massive supply chain issues. We don't know if we're heading into a recession or we're in a recession. There's a lot going on in the external world, and that has a direct impact on all leaders. And what we find with our women leaders is that there's a lot of confidence issues, there's a lot of mental health challenges, and there's a lot of burnout. And I think recognizing that, and if you're a woman leader on this call, look in the mirror and just talk to yourself and say, I'm all that I need to be, and I'm me in this moment. And that's not easy, right? Sometimes it takes a little rewiring of the neural pathways, but if you can't do it yourself, reach out for help. Find people that can be your sponsors or advocates or people that you can talk to. It's really important. So thank you, panel, for sharing, why you made time to come on this session and why you care about this work so deeply. And we're going to move from this the emotional why, and we're going to move into the area of practical guidance. I know that a lot of our participants are chomping at the bit to say, yes, but how do I what can I do? And give me some insights and guidance. And so Sangeetha, I wonder, could we go ahead and start with you again? You and I talk a lot about the work that you lead at Northwestern Mutual. What can we learn from that? What can you offer to our audience?
Yeah, so for context, I work at Northwestern Mutual. It's a Fortune 100, 166-year-old company, and our purpose-driven mission is to free Americans from financial anxiety. And 4 years ago at Northwestern Mutual, we launched our Women's Initiative to accelerate the recruitment, retention, and advancement of women. Simply put, we wanted Northwestern Mutual to be the best place for women to join, to stay, and to grow. So as part of this initiative, we started various initiatives, from study groups to enterprise resource groups to conferences and associations and more. We did them company-wide as well as specific to our advisors and for women in tech, which I'm the executive sponsor for. So we have this really strong network of women and ally groups, including Women's Employee Resource Group, or ERGs as they're called, Women in Tech, Vibe, which is a Black women at Northwestern Mutual, and then the Women's Field Association and Male Allies as well. So it's a lot of initiatives, but I'll just highlight a few that people can take away from. The first one is study groups, and there's a few different ones. We created a study group for our women advisors in the field to help develop confidence, which is something we've talked extensively about today, and conviction and community. And then the second one is that's actually open to people externally as well. And it's a Women in Tech Squad, which is a 6-month group mentoring program where we coach women on everything from how to be vulnerable to how to take risks, how to improve communication, and really champion for each other and for themselves. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, when we open that up, we've had 300 graduates from that already. And when we open that up, anyone is welcome to join as well. And then the third piece is that we want to promote Black women and Latina women and men grow and advance. So we had this rotational cohorts with the senior leadership team as well. And then conference-wise, we have a yearly company-wide conference for women, as well as a similar one for our field advisors. And there's a conference that I'm super passionate about, and that is the Women in Tech Conference. Again, I'm the sponsor for that one. So we host this free virtual conference every year, and it's open externally for you as well. It's in December. Last year, we had more than 5,000 people registered across the country, and 95% identified as female, and we had about 600 companies registered, and we had speakers from startups to big companies and everywhere in between. Again, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you can see when that opens up. And lastly, as an extension of our company's ongoing commitment to support women, Northwestern Mutual's Future Ventures has dedicated $20 million to fund startup companies that are founded by women as well. And if there's any initiatives that, the audience, if you want to learn more about, feel free to connect with me, and I'm happy to share that. As a leader, we talked a little bit about our responsibility, and I feel like, it's kind of like Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. So I'm really excited, proud, humble to work for an organization that champions diversity. And it's been extremely fulfilling for me to be a part of all the great things that we're doing and making a difference.
Thanks, Sangeetha. And I am keeping an eye on the chat, and Erica and I are managing audience vibes and where people are. And Sangeetha, I want to stay with you if I could before I shift to the talent piece with Danielle. And you and I have talked about this. And I'd love if you could share your story and whatever you feel comfortable with. But it's this idea of how do you balance professional and personal, and what does it look like when you get it wrong, and what does it look like when you get it right?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things, right? One thing, no one can do it all. I think it's important for us to recognize that even the most successful among us cannot do it all. So I would say that we have to recognize that, and there's a couple of things that you can do. Number one is that outsource, right? If there is something that you feel that it's not something for you can do, you can delegate or automate, do that. And then the second thing would be that if there is a specific task that you see someone doing better than you, then go and ask them and learn how to do that so you can be more efficient. And the last thing is something that we always deal with, which is this idea of perfection. And we're always told that we have to be perfect in everything. Just let that go, right? Like, let some things go. Your bed doesn't have to be made every day. Your kids' toys don't have to be cleaned up every day. You don't have to read every single email. So really letting some things go. Those are three of the things that I use to help balance.
Yeah, thanks, Sangeetha. We're going to shift, and we're going to stay practical. And for our audience who can have control over the talent systems, certainly you'll hear some things from Danielle, but I think this can apply to everyone. So Danielle, we talked about the 4 areas that we think need to shift. One is the culture, one is the leadership, one is the mindsets, and one is the talent systems. And, specifically, you have a lot of responsibility and accountability, and you have power in that space. So talk to us about that, Danielle.
Yeah, and thanks for the call. And I love the framework you've got and how it all connects, because I think there's so much overlap as well, right? The mindset that even goes into talent management, the leadership role that it plays, it's huge. And yeah, I think everybody has a role to play, particularly, even if you're not a people manager, if you are, responsible for giving feedback to somebody, if you are somebody who is interviewing talent coming into a company, you've got responsibility as well. And I think making sure that is really clear and extended through the company is really, really important. I've definitely spent a lot of time working closely with the DE&I teams in my companies. I've led those teams in some companies, and going together to the executive team, especially as a united front with the same data, with the same message, is so important to make sure that you're literally all on the same page and pointing out where the issues really are. I think a lot of companies, particularly in the tech space, which is where I've spent the last kind of 8 years, they're showing the numbers. We've been a lot more transparent. There is so much more transparency to show, like ethnicity representation by level, gender representation by level, by location, and really dig into where some of those big gaps are and not be afraid of that. I think you've got to know exactly what the baseline is and where you can move the needle. So having that data and united front with D&I teams, absolutely crucial in this space. The other thing is all around assessment criteria, and lots and lots of research out there about how this has been biased for years and it's geared to male competencies and stuff. And I don't disagree personally. I do think it's incumbent upon us, and I've done this work too and encouraged other leaders to really look at that criteria, whether it's for hiring or promotion or other kind of projects that come up. Like, when was the last time we reviewed this and checked for bias? When was the last time we actually thought about, is this serving us, right? Is this the kind of things that we should be looking for? And just having that sense check can really change the game. And it's certainly not about lowering the bar, to be clear, either, or dumbing anything down. If anything, what comes out of those conversations is typically a higher bar or a different bar, right? We look for more things, for example, around empathy or collaboration, as opposed to maybe some of the more traditional, dare I say it, like aggressive kind of characteristics, which really have been around since the 50s and hadn't been updated in a lot of frameworks. So that's super important. And then connected to that is also the same with like job descriptions too. Like we can't copy and paste a job description from 1975. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, we've got to keep evolving those and looking at the jobs we have and what's the work that needs to get done. Again, not about like dumbing it down for like any particular group, but it is about being realistic about what's needed, right? And there's certain roles that maybe now they need a chief of staff to help them, or they need a biz ops role to help them, not because that person is incompetent, but because the job's now 10 times the size it was in 1973. So really being realistic about that is super important. And then my final bit here, because I could rant on about this forever, but feedback, and all the research out there about women not getting useful, constructive, critical feedback, because maybe they're worried we're about to burst into tears and have a meltdown if that happens. But we really, really need that feedback. And so setting up the structures that is required. And I would say it's incumbent on us as women to open that door too, right? Allow somebody to give us the feedback and not just be like, oh, what did you think? But really try and be like, hey, I would love your feedback after that meeting. I'm not sure how well it went. And just make sure it's very, very explicit that you're open to feedback and that you want to hear the critical stuff, the developmental stuff, as well as the good pieces.
Thanks, Danielle. And I think this piece on feedback is really important. We do a lot of blind research in organizations to look at feedback that women leaders have had and feedback that men leaders have had. And it's vastly different. Often what it looks like for men is, if you can tackle these end markets, if you can increase your revenue by 30%, and if you can look at your EBITDA or do these specific things, then we can certainly talk about your promotion. When we look at feedback for women leaders, we often see things like, you're too aggressive, you're too emotional, you need to think about toning it down. And so we go in blind and do the research, and every time we do that, that's what emerges. And we have to ask ourselves why. And what we've found is that there's a couple of reasons. The Me Too movement did not serve us well, because people are afraid to give feedback because of where it will lead us to. The other thing is what we call protective hesitation, meaning, oh, I just don't want to make Danielle feel bad because she reminds me of my daughter. So let me not give her that feedback. And then there's also the response that that people get when we give them feedback. And so the guidance I give is really simple. If somebody gives you feedback, say thank you. That's it. They will surely come and give you feedback again. You get to decide what you do with that feedback.
Actually, yeah.
Danielle, would you mind just a little bit more definition, right? We've had a couple of comments around competencies and the old model not serving as well. And what would you see on a modern version of a competency model, and what would you see in a antiquated version?
Yeah, on an old-fashioned one. I think the modern ones lean much more in to what I would describe as emotional leadership. So things around how you collaborate with others, how you bring others along with you, how you're looking at leadership, not just by like telling teams what to do, but creating fellowship and bringing people along with you. And I do think that those characteristics are a more modern version. And frankly, the pandemic has helped us in that space as well, right? Becoming more empathetic and open has become much more accepted in the workplace, which is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. But more old-fashioned models, to your point, is much more about the what than the how, and looking about what they should do. Like achievement used to be a huge one that was always in every and it's often in various kind of criteria. And obviously performance and getting things done is table stakes, right? You've got to have that, but that's not the only thing we should be looking for, and frankly, when you've seen, and I'm sure all of us have got numerous people we can think of in our minds right now about someone who was fantastic at getting things done, but a terrible person to work with or work for. And so that's the classic example where we've over-rotated on the performance thing and the results, but we have really under-rotated on what is that person going to be like? And I'm constantly surprised when companies hire for leadership positions, people leadership positions, and do not spend maybe even 5% of the interviewing time asking about people leadership and like how they do that and what they do. I mean, that is just irresponsible, honestly. So that's a major one that we need to work on.
Yeah. And I'm reading some of the chats and the questions. And this one's for you, Danielle, so we'll stick with you for a second.
Okay, that's great.
What is something big or small you feel people at all levels within a company can do to create a more inclusive workplace?
Oh, it's a great question. I think a lot of it is calling out when you see it. And there's been lots of discussion about this, but even if as small things as in a meeting, if somebody's being talked over or they made a point, you're the one to amplify it, right? And I say, hey, I think Sangeetha had something to say, or I think Katie wanted to jump in there. And you create the space if it has not been created for them. And you also, not passive aggressively, that's not fair, but kind of subtly calling out the fact that whoever was leading that meeting didn't pay attention to that. And so that again tends to be, similar with kids, right? Where you catch them in the moment when they're doing something in order to give the feedback. It's a similar thing. So I think that's a very kind of active one that people can do, because it's easy to talk about what inclusivity means, but it's harder to do it. I mean, the other thing, I'm like boring my team so much at the moment with this phrase, but if we want to change, we have to change. I keep saying that. Like, if we want change in the things we're doing, then we have to be a part of that as well. So that does mean not fitting a certain mold, but I think it does mean being honest with ourselves about how we kind of conduct ourselves or run things, and could we be doing things in a different way? Do we always go to the same favorite people to work with on projects? Do we run things because I'm a natural extrovert and so I'm used to having those kinds of conversations and not paying enough attention to the introverts? We need to address those questions in ourselves as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. We have quite a number of questions around, moving forward in your career and how you get from one place to the other. And Katie, I want to create some space for you. Clearly, you have a very successful career at Johnson & Johnson, and a lot of the folks on the session are asking, how did you get there, and what were some of the techniques or strategies, or how did you ready yourself?
So, Audrey, that is a great question. And what I will share are some of the things that I did, but it's not a playbook. And the first thing I think that is important to share in this is that it is all about authenticity. These are some things that worked for me. They worked very well for me because they suited me. But one of the biggest elements of success is you can't go too far off the mark of who you actually are. When you start to flex too far, and this is not about being uncomfortable learning new things, but it's moving away from kind of your core tenets, your core personality. You have to stay authentic to yourself. And at my heart, I am a builder of a community. And someone mentioned that about Audrey earlier on in the session. And I have been successful because I have surrounded myself and built relationships with all kinds of people who have incredible talents in so many different places. I look at the team that I lead today. I have the honor to lead today. And Audrey did a session with us on our predictive index, different personality types. And I picked a lot of my leaders because they were different from me. They were very different from me. And I did that because I knew I had blind spots. I had things that I was not going to be good at or natural to. So I could stay authentic to my leadership style. I could create a vision for my team, and I could make sure that I could care for all different kinds of people around me and fully think through the problems. And I've done that throughout many, many parts of my career. My success in great part is because of the people. And it's also shining a light, not just on the vision of what we're trying to achieve, but connecting those people and showing them what they can do. We talked a little bit about imposter syndrome. We talked about lack of confidence, and that exists in both genders, in all genders. A lot of what I have done has been illuminating incredible talent to what they can do, and letting them run. Another piece is taking risks. I have never taken a job in the last 25 years, I'll date myself, that hasn't scared me in some way, that hasn't been a flex, hasn't been some really new thing that I'm doing. And I think it's important, really, when you're thinking about building your career, learning new things, to demonstrate that you can take those risks. Again, that's my personality type. It works for me. But those are some of the things that I have done. And I saw a couple of questions around sponsorship come up. And I feel so passionate about this piece. And it ties into the mentorship versus sponsorship. Why is that important? I have also built a lot of sponsorship for myself. And it's not just about me. I do it for my team. I do it for my organization. And to me, a sponsor is someone, Audrey, you said this before, who's willing to advocate, who knows who I am, who knows who my team is, and is willing to kind of move the pieces behind the scenes. Mentors are incredible, but you have to have that kind of connectivity. You know, as women, we often are loath to ask for the help, that next step. I have an incredible network, but what if I never do anything with it? I love the conversations we have. I love the connection we have. But if I'm afraid to ask, someone that I've been working with for 10 years, hey, I'm really interested in this job, or I'm really excited to learn this new thing. If I'm afraid to ask that person for help or their engagement, I'm really limiting what I could do with that network. So that sponsorship is another really, really important part. And it's kind of the capstone to the kind of final thing, which is thoughtful self and team promotion. Not finding a way at all costs, not being mercenary and stabbing people in the back. You see plenty of that. I have no interest in it. But you have to also learn to promote yourself, to promote your team, to promote the people around you, and do it in a thoughtful way. Tie it to, let's say I'm working with one of my peers. How do I tie some of the things that I'm trying to do with what they're doing and promote that positive connection together? How do I promote some of the individuals within my team and share and showcase their talents? It's not self-aggrandizing. It's just very thoughtful. And sometimes as women, this kind of theme of fear and lack of confidence comes in. We have to set that aside. And again, coming back to authenticity, that all works for me. You're going to find a version of that for yourself where you feel comfortable and confident. But remember, you can. You absolutely can.
I think that's right, Katie. And this idea of who am I? Why do I do the work I do? And what is it that brings me joy? And this idea of authenticity has so many tentacles. And Erica, would you mind putting in the chat for everybody? We have a Women on Their Way summit that we're hosting in August and here in Tampa. And the theme is authenticity, the leader in you. And so we're going to have some incredible speakers from Pinterest and Lululemon. We're going to have Facebook and Intel. We're going to have the first Iranian women leader astronaut in space. You're going to learn a lot about authenticity because, Katie, you said what works for me may not work for you. And what we find with authenticity is when you can't live the life you want to live, that creates stress. And it takes energy out of who you are. And that takes us to, I think we've had a few questions here around mental health and stress for teenage girls. And, we've certainly had a lot of things that can impact that. I personally have twin daughters and both of them seek help, right? And it's nothing to be ashamed of. And what you will find is that there's probably nobody in your circle that doesn't have somebody close to them that suffers from mental health. And, the biggest piece of advice that I would offer is find ways to get them professional help, whatever that looks like. If it's counseling, if it's community, if it's church, if whatever that may be, find ways to support them. I'm going to take a leap on this session, and I'm going to imagine that the 1,000+ people on this session can afford at some level to engage with a mental health professional, whatever level that may be. And I also know that there are millions and millions of other teenage girls who do not have those resources. And, you know, it's an epidemic. We focused on the physical piece of wear a mask, get an injection, wash your hands. And we never imagined that we would have this tsunami of mental health. And so for the person that asked that question, it is real. And if you can find ways to get help to the people that need it, then I think that's the best piece of advice that we would give. And also make it comfortable to talk about it. Katherine and I were at a session this morning, and there was a large percentage of women leaders in the room who were emotional. And they were emotional because they were stressed and they were burnt out and they were suffering from mental health. And they were able to talk about it, and we created space. There's a great video that Brene Brown does, which is around empathy and sympathy. And that's back to Danielle's point, which is, you know, empathy as a skill is in high demand, but short supply. And so practicing empathy with those people, I think, is important as well. Let me see if any of our panel want to jump in and build off anything that I just said based on some of those questions that we had from the audience. Katie, I see you off mute. I'm not sure if you want to hop in. No.
I'm looking for a good one.
No worries. Let me see. I'm keeping an eye on the questions as we're going, as well as keeping the panel conversations. As we get, and I can't believe our times went so quickly, but as we step into, we took off and then we were traveling, and then we're landing the plane here. So Sangeetha, I want to create some space. Is there some inspiration, or is there a win that you would offer to our audience as we step away from this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, at the end of the day, it's not just about equal rights. It's also about how we think. We talked a lot about that. We also have to reshape our own perceptions of how we view ourselves. There's statistics to show that, men will take jobs that they're not ready for, whereas women will wait to feel prepared, or there's a lot of statistics that you discussed as well, Audrey. So too often, women and girls are not told not to be ambitious. I grew up in India where children were seen as a burden. I was always told, girls can't do this. Don't rock the boat. Be grateful for what you have. And the expectation was to follow the rules. And, I didn't follow the rules, and that's why I'm here. So I've realized that the way to change this is that we must unlearn some of those bad lessons that we were taught as children, and we have to recognize our value, and we have to demand for what we deserve. Every one of you here have a seat at the table because you deserve it, and so we shouldn't doubt ourselves. One tactical tip that I use every day is I spend a minute with this cheerleader in my head and remind myself of one or two things that I did really well that day, or something that I kicked ass in, and it certainly helped me build confidence.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thank you, Sangeetha. And I think for those of us on this session that have worked with counselors or coaches or mental health professionals, one of the things they'll always ask you is, what do you love about yourself? And I can't tell you the number of women who struggle to answer that question. So to double down on Sangeetha's quick win, I would say, get a piece of paper after this session, blank, and write on it 3 things you love about yourself. Don't leave your desk until you write those 3 things down. So thank you, Sangeetha. Danielle, what would you offer?
Yeah, I love that. I'm grinning after that. I feel fired up, Sangeetha, as well. So, and kind of an inspiration and a declaration. So inspiration is that things, I mean, 132 years, whatever you said. I mean, it's so depressing, isn't it, at the beginning? But there is change happening in pockets. And hopefully we've talked about some of those things. I can say eBay, for example, like the last year, we've really tried to push on female representation at the VP and above level for our hires, right, coming in for new hires. And we achieved 50% last year. So 50% women, 50% men, which has typically been like 80 to 20%, 80 male to 20% female. So still not good enough, still plenty of work to do, but I kind of take those wins as we go of like, we can do it with some dedicated focus, really like a lot of education and consultation with our hiring leaders. Like it's possible. And I think if we just try and extrapolate that, I mean, hopefully it'll take, I don't know, 131 years instead of 132, like every little helps in this effort. So it is possible, and we are trying hard to move the needle. I mean, the other thing I would say, and I don't want to be like flippant on this because everyone has their own personal circumstances, and I, of course, don't know all of those things. However, I do find women more so than men, if they're in a bad situation or they don't feel like getting the right visibility, or they feel, there was a comment earlier in the chat today about, it feels like every time I go up for promotion, like the rules change and something else is thing. It's like, I would encourage you to think boldly about that. And like, if you're not being appreciated, should you be there? And so there are like, we're not in the craziness of the hiring last year, but there are a lot of opportunities out there. And with the networks that you have, and to Katie's point earlier about leveraging those networks, not just having them, but really using them and reaching out. And look, I appreciate, obviously we got our financial security. I'm not telling everyone to quit their jobs today, but I am saying, if you really aren't appreciated and you've tried and you're doing all the right things and it's still not going anywhere, then change tack. You don't have to stay there and be unappreciated or be miserable. So I'm just always kind of a rallier for that kind of bold change.
Yeah. And it's this idea of, one piece of advice I was given is, Audrey, put your hands on the steering wheel and drive the car. You're in charge. And where do you want it to go? And so that would be my second quick one. Put your hands on the steering wheel, which is not always easy to do. Katie, are you going to take us home?
Yes, I think maybe two pieces of advice. One very small one, and it builds a little bit on what Danielle was saying. Often I find women leaders, they have so many requests for their time, so many demands of their time, whether it's professional, whether it's personal. There's so much coming to you that you should, could, may do. And I would ask that you think about your priorities, think about your North Star, and make sure that the things that you do every day are about your North Star, not about the 11 people around you asking and pushing and saying, this is what I need. And certainly there's balance there, your family, your friends, different elements, but you always have to keep that priority, that kind of North Star in your mind. And then on the imposter syndrome side, I know it's a theme, but if you're experiencing that, and I saw a lot of questions in the chat about it, a lot of great advice too on what to do with it. One thing that I often do with folks that I engage with who are experiencing it is break it down one by one into little pieces so you can chunk it out so it's manageable. And then 2, ask what's the worst thing that can happen. You apply for a job that you're not ready for. You don't get it. Okay. That's not scary. The worst case scenario is often not that big of a deal. And if you never do it, you'll never get a chance. So break it down in those 2 pieces. If you're experiencing that, it's usually incredibly helpful and empowering. You get to make a choice then with all the facts.
Yeah. Thank you, Katie. And thank you on behalf of Women on Their Way to all of our panel members. We want to offer our deep appreciation, and to every single person and every single company that carved out time to be with us today. Erica, let me have you continue to extend that gratitude.
Yes, thank you everyone so much for being here. As we close out our session, I really challenge you to take the extra 5 minutes Audrey challenge to write down the 3 things that you love about yourself and really take a practical step today. And if you're interested in learning more about our tools and our practices or learning more about the summit, please visit our website. And if you would like to speak to someone from Women on Their Way directly, please reach out to us via email and we would love to set up that time with you. So thank you so much for being here and we look forward to talking to you soon.